Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Murdoch, and this is Webinars with Wendy. I'm continuing to do this series of webinars to help horse people understand more about some of the things they might not know when it comes to managing their horses, whether that's teeth, feet, back, saddle, or rider. And of course, today my guest is Rebecca Husted, who has been, she is our preparedness webinar person. It's all the things you don't want to think about, but you really should, so that you're prepared and it's taken care of in advance. So if something should happen, you already have a plan. And that's the most important thing, right? To have a plan. So welcome, Rebecca. Thank you so much for coming back yet again.
I'm thrilled to be here. As usual, it gives people a chance to ask questions and those kind of things. So it's great. Let's see. It says host participant screen sharing disabled. So
I just need to make you co-host. That's all. I just have to be friendly here. There we go. You got it.
There we go.
So Rebecca has her own playlist. If you've missed any of her webinars, just go to the Surefoot Equine YouTube channel and look under playlists. You will see her name, Rebecca Husted. And I think this is number 6, 7.
I think so. Yeah. I think so.
All really good webinars, and take action. If you've learned something on her webinars that you can do something about, take that action. You will not regret it.
And the best thing is this is being recorded, so that if there's anything that's a lot of detail on a slide that you can't get, you can always come back to the recorded version and get it. And we'll follow up with some other educational materials as usual. So we're going to talk about flooding preparedness, not really response so much. I did prepare this in, I'm sure, Wendy, you heard, Loretta Lynn Ranch out in Tennessee. It's about 60 miles north of where my parents live. They lost their ranch manager 2 days ago in that huge flood out there. So I wanted to make sure that we memorialized him with this presentation. I don't know him personally, but several of my friends do know him, and they know the family very well. So very sad. All right, so we're going to talk about flooding preparedness. This is not preparedness. This is waiting too late, in my personal opinion. I often upset people with my comments about those kind of things, but it's important. What we're going to try to do today, as usual, is we're going to have some graphic photos. We're going to have a lot of difficult ideas, maybe some offensive comments. I'll just go ahead and apologize for those now. I try to get people to laugh a little bit and change the way you think about things and what you can do that's an actionable item for preparedness, in this case for flooding. So whether you realize it or not, whether you're standing or sitting, you are sitting in a watershed right now, unless you happen to be on that 0.5 millimeter drainage divide between something that goes to the Pacific and something that goes to the Atlantic. But this is just one picture of the big watersheds that we have in North America that drain our country. And it doesn't matter whether you live in a desert or a forest, or you live in a mountain, you live down in a valley. From where you are, water is still draining downhill, because most of us don't live at 0 feet of elevation, which would be literally in the ocean. So everything's draining downhill from you to the ocean. And it sort of depends on how high you are. And there's a lot of other factors. But if we think about that as precipitation collector, precipitation being anything that's snow, ice, water that's falling, it's always going towards the ocean, and it's more than willing to take us with it if we're not really careful, and all the other things that we hold dear. Wendy and I were just talking a little bit before, about how some of the things that are changing as far as climate change and flooding predictions and those kind of things. This is an article that came out in the New York Times a little over a year ago, and they were looking at some of the old FEMA estimates for what areas had a percentage of properties that were at risk of flooding during a major storm. And then they had some independent researchers' new estimates. And if you notice, if you don't look at anything else, it's darker on the right, which means there's a much higher percentage of properties that are at risk of flooding. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it has to do with climate change. Some of it has to do with how we are terraforming the planet. Some of it has to do with changes in coastal flooding, the number of storms that are hitting us, those kind of things. But in general, most places are affected. And some of it comes down to, Wendy, our human tendency to say, oh my God, what a beautiful valley. I think I'll build my house and put my barn there. And then we forget about the reason the valley's there is because Mother Nature has been sending water down there for a long time. So a lot of these things are changing. And part of the reason they're changing is because we've gotten so much better at our modeling. And the data that we pull in, or not we, but the USGS and the geological hydrology people. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of information about, on the right-hand side, I just randomly picked a picture of a sort of a beautiful farm area where there's a lot of horse farms and that kind of stuff up in Virginia. And on the bottom right picture is a picture of what our suburbia is starting to look like all over North America. And the biggest difference between those two things, other than the fact that it's not as pretty, is all of the roof and all of the asphalt is impervious surfaces. So those impervious surfaces make it impossible for rain to come down, hit a surface, and drain in. It drains off. It floods across that surface until it gets to a storm drain or something. And as human beings, we've been terraforming and trying to engineer these things. So what we do is we shunt it to a river or a stream. Well, guess what? When it's moving that fast and it gets into that river or that stream and it doesn't have a chance to trickle down into the aquifer or into the groundwater storage, we get problems. And it ain't your problem. It's who's downstream of you. And so all of a sudden, if you're living in that beautiful place in Virginia, but you've got all that housing above you in your floodplain, guess what? Eventually, you're going to endure some of the pain from all those big asphalted surfaces and roofs and those kind of things. So a lot of that comes down to what kind of soils you live in, and I am not the expert on this kind of stuff, okay? But it has to do with your soil characteristics. I live on sand. I chose where I live. Literally 2 miles away is the clay soils, and I said no, I don't want to have to live on clay. So I live in sand. It drains a lot easier. How much your soil is saturated. This week we've been getting lots of rain. If it rains again today, I'm going to have water sheeting across my driveway. What kind of soils do you have? And then, of course, the slope of the land. If you live on a very steep surface, of course, you're going to have water moving faster, which means it can't drain in. So you're going to find out why this is important here in a little while. So let's do a little thought experiment. Let's just say that it rains 1 inch, and we're going to measure it over 1 square mile. So 1 square mile is a mile by a mile. It's just a square. How many gallons would that be? Turns out that some poor booger had to sit down and figure that out, and it comes out to be 17 million something gallons, okay? Well, Wendy, where I live, it's not unusual to get 4 inches of rain in a very short period.
4 inches of rain last week.
Exactly. In just 3 hours, I can get 4 inches of rain very easily. We did it last week. So how much is that in gallons? That's 69 million gallons. And why is that a big deal? And why does that?
Oh, you froze.
How big is that? It's a lot. Look at my drainage basin that comes by my house. The creek that comes by my house, 2-3 square miles. And it turns out that when I got that 4 inches of rain, that drainage basin had to process 159 million gallons in about 3 hours. That's 242 swimming pools. It's impossible to imagine how much water that is. Now, we will talk about how I know how big my drainage basin is here in a little bit. And every one of you guys is going to be able to figure that out for where you live. And that's part of this presentation. So a couple educational tools that we have. If you go to the USGS website, there is so much information and mapping capabilities and all these kinds of things on their website. It's amazing. And if you look, all those little dots on this paper are from the water dashboard, which basically is collectors that have been put in stream beds, and they're constantly collecting 24/7. Some of them even have cameras, and they're looking at how much water is coming through there, what's the temperature of the water, how much crap is in the water. They literally do have measurement. It's just absolutely amazing when you start putting the data together, and especially over time, because and I couldn't believe that some of the data went back that far. It's just absolutely amazing.
Hey, Rebecca,
Yeah.
Rebecca, I need to stop you for a second and change which internet I'm on because I'm breaking up. It always wants to grab the external. So hang with me. I am going to switch network. Okay, are you back?
I'm back. I can hear you.
Okay, great. We should be better because it was starting to break up and then I realized why.
Oh.
It goes to the external, the outside one instead of the inside one. I don't know. Okay.
That's okay. So this is the website of interest to most of you guys. So if you go to the water data at usgs.gov website, you can actually pull the information for your stream, your river that is local. So I just went to mine the other day, and actually I pulled it up again today and updated it and got the information. For example, you can look at precipitation total in inches since August 16th. You can tell that I've had about 2.5 inches over in the Oconee River since last week. You can look at the gauge height. Now that's actually at the bridge, and I'm going to show you the bridge in a little bit. Looking at the real-time hydrographs, I can look at what's the gauge height. What is the discharge in cubic feet per second? Why do we care? Because if I'm going to drive across that bridge, I want to make sure it's not in flood stage, right? So those are the things that are in for, and some of these actually have live cameras too. So if you go to your state in the waterdata.gov, usgs.gov, you can actually find that for your little streams and rivers close to you. Use this as an example. There's my dad. My dad always said, look at the height of the bridges, look where they put the road, pull out a terrain map and a flood map, and do not build your house or your barn below that. And he told me that when I was a kid, and it's still true. And so when I came here, that's what I did. I got the soil maps, I got the flood maps, I got the terrain maps, and I looked and said, hey, where's that house? Where's the creek? Oh, let's see, I'm 60 feet above that. If, like you said, Wendy, if it gets up 60 feet, we're in biblical times, okay? But what I did was I went ahead and looked at that information at Milledgeville, and that's the bridge. When I first drove over here, I drove across the bridge and I was like, wow, that bridge sure is way the heck up here. I wonder why the heck it's up here so far. So I went and looked, what is a river cresting? The drawing that I have there with the red lines is the estimated of the actual bridge. And I've sort of estimated the heights of the river from obviously low water. And why the heck in Georgia would you have a bridge 50 feet tall? It just seems crazy. I mean, you do that out west a lot, but why in Georgia? Well, it turns out that just moderate flood stage is 32 feet because this is right downstream from a dam and it handles a huge amount of water. So what that means to me is if you live somewhere that has a river and has big bridges like this, you need to be looking around before you buy this stuff. Now you can buy flood insurance and all those kind of things, but I don't know about you, Wendy. Insurance never pays back enough. It's
not. It's just the drama of it all is not worth it.
It's just not worth it. You do not want to play that silly game. So I'm all about preparedness and prevention in the first place. So, these are the kind of data that you can pull off those hydrographs. You can spend hours looking at these kinds of things. And it was really funny because I put a red line there that says the approximate 40-foot gauge height, which is, well above flood stage, major flood stage. And you can see that on several occasions, it's gone well above that. So that's why the bridge is that tall, because they know you got to be above 40 feet to be safe with that bridge. Otherwise, the bridge is going to get taken out. And so they're not dumb. They figured it out. So we need to be smarter about how we do these things and figure it out, especially before we put in. It's perfectly fine to have a horse pasture. It's perfectly fine to have those kind of things. But when you start putting in barns and fixed facilities and houses, you got to be more careful about where you do these kind of things. So I also want to highlight to you guys something called Stream Stats, which is also a USGS product. And you can literally use the StreamStats website to go down and find your house on your road all the way down to the very details. And I highlighted it in a little red box where my house is, but you notice those little streamlets are blue. And if you click on close to my house, downstream from my house slightly, I clicked on that. And then what I'm able to do is actually determine the size of that drainage basin. And that's where I got that number from. That's the entire drainage basin that's draining past my house on this little creek that's called Crooked Creek around my house. So why does that matter? Because it's about 2.3 square miles. And that is important to me because I want to know how much water can come down through that area. That's actually what they're using on flood prediction maps and those kind of things. There's some people who live in places, Wendy, where they cannot get flood insurance. And I'm like, if they're not going to give you flood insurance, because they know better. And it turns out that all of this stuff has been updated so much. The regression is online, and you can do it for little teeny tiny creeks, or you can do it for big rivers. It's amazing. Depends on how much, whether or not you're on fiber or not. I can't do it from my house because I don't have fiber. Anyway, one of the first things I've got to get you guys to understand is there is no such thing. You hear this in the media. It's a 100-year flood. It's a 500-year flood. It's a 1,000-year flood. There's no such thing. The media actually came up with that because I guess they're sort of dumb and they couldn't figure it out. What it is it's a frequency analysis at how often does an event like that happen. So I've given you an example here. We're going to assume they got 15 inches of rain out in Tennessee. So I used the 15 inches here. There's a 1 in 500 chance that 15 inches of rainfall is going to fall in a particular area in a 24-hour period during any given year. Okay. So we're going to say, hey, that's a predicted 500-year recurrence interval. That means it might happen once in a 500-year recurrence, but it could also happen next year. And that's why when they say once in 500 years or whatever, it gets very confusing to people. It's really just a frequency analysis, and it could happen at any time. Now, it probably won't happen, but the way things are going, Wendy, things are changing so much.
It reminds me of Ellicott City in Maryland, where a couple of years ago they had the 500-year flood, and it took out the main street through the town. And I think in the next year or within 2 years, it happened again, and it took out it went right down the main street.
Those videos of that event were awful, and it was absolutely horrific. And it can happen, and part of that has to do probably with a lot of new homes and things being put upstream.
Yeah.
But those kind of changes, that's why it's important to look around and see what's in your area, because when those things start to change, it's sort of like somebody's going, hey, you need to move the barn.
Yeah.
Sometimes people can't take a hint, right? So anyway, I know that's a busy slide, but that is really to prove to you guys, it's not, it's a media spin to try to say it's a 1 in a 500 year. It can happen next year. So it just has to do with math. And I guess most people don't like to do math. When you pull these reports, this happens to be the report for my property, you can take a look at the 0.2%, which is your 500-year supposed flood reoccurrence. You can take a look at, I would have to get to 254 feet per cubic feet per second coming down through my creek to get to the quote 500-year reoccurrence. And even if that happened, it would only come up about 10 feet. So you can look at these kind of things. And that's why this website, the StreamStats, is really important for you guys to take a look at. And it's free and it's on the internet and you can download it. The other thing that I always encourage people to do is get a topographic map of where you live. This is not the place to learn about how to use a topographic map, but anybody in the military can teach you about what a topo map is. And there's obviously free resources online too. But you can go to that website, again, through usgs.gov and get a topographic map of where you live. It can be of your entire county. You can do just your little city. You can do right around your house like I have here. And you notice that my house is right below the 500-foot contour. And then you look down there where the blue stuff is, and that's about the 430-foot contour, which means my house is almost 70 feet above where the creek is. And that's important when you start talking about water. You don't want to be in the area where the water's coming up. So that's just fundamental to understanding, I think, for floodplains. And I'm not sure that anybody ever puts this information out. So what's really funny is I did all that to check. And then Georgia has a flood map program. Most states have their own. They all look a little bit different, guys. So you'll have to do a little bit of hunting for your particular state. And if you can't find it, you can always get a hold of me. But the flood mapping program, if you look at my house, which is a little red dot there in the center, and then you look at the slight blue, guess what? That shows what the worst case scenario for the flood would be. And it's right above my pond. It's right above the bottom side of my pastures. So it matches pretty well with what we already took a look at with the effect in my area from this thing. So anyway, the point being, there's lots of resources out there for you guys to educate yourself about that kind of thing.
So the bottom line here is, if you haven't built your house or barn, go check out these maps, determine your floodplain, and make sure you're above it. You know, if you're buying a house, go check out the maps and make sure the house you're buying is above it. If you're going to build a barn or rent or even board in a barn, you might want to go check out the maps and make sure your horse is going to be above it, right?
Yeah, a girlfriend of mine, she kept her horse out in San Diego, and they actually had a great solution because they had so many floods so often. They actually had a great solution, but that's the first thing that she was like, this is interesting. She gets there and they're like, well, this is your paddock for flooding. She was like, what? They had little 10 by 10s for every single horse, and they had built up the area. And if it flooded, everybody was expected to get their horses and put them in their paddocks. Wow. And that was just part of the way they did things. And I was sitting there thinking, wow, I mean, but they had a plan. So at least they had a plan. So one of the things that you guys have got to understand, you should not be walking around in floodwater. You shouldn't be driving around in floodwater, particularly not with a horse trailer. But you never know. You can't see anything under flooded roadways. You can't see anything in the dark. And you just don't want to be moving around in this kind of stuff. So if it occurs, you got to get yourself and your animals to higher ground, wherever that higher ground may be, preferably before the flooding comes, which means you're looking at the weather more often than some people already do, and really avoid those areas that are flooded. And I'm going to show you some of the reasons why, because you just don't want to put anything close to those areas. They can fail at any time. Turn around, don't drown is one of the things that the fire service has put out over the years, trying to get people to not try. It looks like it's only 3 inches high, but if it's moving fast enough, it can take your car or your truck off.
Well, how many times do we see on the TV a flood and people are trying to drive through it? I mean,
it happens all the time. And it's very frustrating, because the thing is that just a couple inches of water, you don't know how fast it's moving. If it's moving really fast, it can literally move your car off into the water. And then the problem, Wendy, is once a car goes into the water, often it turns over. And when it turns over on its side or on its roof, from the fire perspective, becomes so unusual a situation, your brain can't really figure out what's going on. And then you've got to try to get your windows open. You've got to try to get out. And God forbid, you've got a child in the back seat in a seatbelt.
Yeah.
So just, it's not worth it. And this, there's thousands of pictures of many different communities. This just happens to be one where you can see there's nowhere you can go because everything's flooded. If I tell you not to drive around in floodwater, there's nowhere you can go. And you will see some military and you will see some fire and rescue emergency vehicles moving around and those kind of things. But a lot of those vehicles are much higher. They're made for that kind of thing. They're spec'd for that kind of thing. And they still lose them once in a while. So it's just not worth it. So get out before you have to. So as usual, Wendy, we talk about there's all these different methods for planning and developing our farm disaster plans. And you got the poor one, which is, oh my God, what are we going to do now? And then we have the good one, which is, hey, what are some of the things that we can do right before the disaster? But the best one is why you guys are here right now. I'm speaking to the choir. You're not being impacted right now, but you're looking around and you're saying, hey, how can I come up with a plan? Where are my resources? I'm going to take a little bit of time and effort out of my day to try to plan this for me and my animals. So that's why you guys are here. So yay, that's what it's all about. This is some of the homework. We've talked about this kind of homework on many webinars. And the ones I'm highlighting today is find your property on the terrain maps, the flood maps, the fire maps. If you live, usually we're talking about wildfire too. But whatever kind of maps are going to impact you, in this case, flooding and water. And then update and read the fine print on your insurance. So flood insurance, normal insurance, business insurance. If you're running your barn as a business, you need to make sure that you have read through and checked, because there's so many horror stories of people who have been paying on their insurance premiums for years, and then something happens and then they don't get a payout because they didn't read the fine thing. And whenever it comes to water, I can promise you there's a lot of insurance things that don't pay when you think they would. So just be very, very careful. Have somebody that knows what they're looking at look over it with you. And then, of course, all the other prevention and pre-plans that we normally talk about. So evacuation and shelter in place are the other two things that we're going to talk about. So that's what we're here for, networking, planning, and preparing. Now, I cannot imagine, Wendy, trying to get horses in a situation like this. This is, you can see the yellow boat in the background. Those are some responders that are trying to get to where the horses are. Everything in floodwater is covered up. You can't see where the fences are. You can't see where the holes are. Any of the normal obstacles, the horses can't see them either. And so they get caught in fences, they get trapped in barbed wire, they get step into things, all those kind of things. And it's just extremely dangerous for them. It's dangerous for us. And of course, when you're talking multiples of animals, can you imagine swimming with these animals, trying to get them to safety? It's extremely dangerous. And this is why emergency responders and fire departments say, we don't do large animal rescue because that's too dang dangerous. And I don't blame them. That is an extremely dangerous situation that obviously someone should have thought ahead for that. And the biggest thing with water is not only is it physically dangerous, there's other things in the water with you. And that is the biologics, the funguses, the pitheosis, all those other things that the veterinarians worry about after an animal's been exposed to water for a long time. So Wendy, all of us have had the experience of sitting in a tub too long. And when you get out, your fingers are all, sort of funny. Well, what happens if you are in dirty water for too long? What happens is eventually the way your body normally protects you, if you get that much water in there, sometimes some water can sneak into the cells. And what it usually brings in with it is bacteria and fungus and those kind of things that might be in the water. And the worst thing about floodwater is it's not just water. It's whoever had a septic treatment plant upstream of you that it's overdone. So there's chemicals, there's manure from animals as well as humans in the water. There's everything that's in everybody's little backyard. They always got that little shed, and inside the shed, what's in it? Hell, I don't know. It's got pesticides, herbicides, ant killer, oil,
diesel fuel,
chemicals, and all this crap. And most people have never touched it in 15 years. It's just sitting there. But now it's in the water. And once it's in the water with you, time and time again, rescuers, responders, people who get trapped in these kind of situations, they end up at the hospital because they've got some creeping crud or they've got some unusual thing that happens to their skin. And obviously it happens to animals too. So this happens to be one horse. She actually survived it. But I can tell you guys that this is not a fun thing for her. It's not a fun thing for you. And I bet you it's not a fun thing for your wallet either, because this is 24-hour treatment at the vet clinic to try to help deal with this. This is basically, the way to think about it, Wendy, is it's like a burn. Even though it's water, it's like a burn, because what the effect on the skin is, it's very friable. You can see that it's actually peeling off, and it's just an awful thing to have to treat. And of course, there's some of these injuries that are just not survivable for the horses. These are fortunately some examples of horses who did survive these kind of things, but it literally looks like a burn, and it has to be taken very seriously. You need to, if your animal's been affected by this, it obviously needs veterinary treatment immediately to try to get the animal through these things. And it can happen even if they're only standing in a foot of water. These happen to be horses that were standing in deep water, but if they're standing in a couple inches of water up above their hooves for days, they can have some of the similar injuries.
It reminds me when Houston flooded, there were a lot of horses that got caught in that.
I think some of these horses were actually from the Houston floods.
Yeah, because that was one where I particularly remember the floodwaters with the horses.
Like this one? Yeah.
Yeah.
So part of the challenges, if people, you guys got to remember the emergency responders are looking at this and they're like, okay, people first. Now we got the people out. Oh, now we got to go get these animals out. Do we want to do that or not? And they're looking at it from the perspective of how dangerous is it to do. And if you think you're going to have a firefighter go out there on a horseback and rope other horses and bring them in, that's just not going to happen. It's really dangerous to do. Swimming with horses is extremely dangerous. We've all done it. I hope you guys have done it. If you've never gotten to swim with a horse, it's a lot of fun, but it's friggin' dangerous. And nothing makes you more, they're so powerful. You can just feel them just coursing through the water. But you certainly don't want to do it in the floodwater with the logs and the fences and all those other kind of things.
And the panic. The horses are panicking.
Exactly. And there's a lot of horses, Wendy, that don't know how to swim. They sort of got to learn to swim. It's just like us. So, and that's the whole point of this slide is, yes, there's options. There's shelter in place on your front porch options. There's some friends of mine over in New Zealand. They actually lifted this horse out by a helicopter because it was in pretty nasty swift water and they just couldn't take the chance on. And of course the bank was like rock and it was like this angle. So they just lifted it out with a helicopter. But some of the things that people try to do, you're really putting yourself at risk, and we just really can't suggest that. So what we really need for flooding is to think about having an evacuation plan where you have to leave. Okay, it's not going to work. We got to go. And that evacuation plan, we always talk about these all hazards evacuation plans, looks very similar to every other evacuation plan for any other kind of disaster. Making sure you got a truck hitched, making sure you got plenty of fuel, your animals are easy to trailer, your trailer's ready to roll, you've got some food, you got water, you got your valuables. Everybody knows the plan in your family so that somebody doesn't end up here when they're supposed to be there. And you're always getting the updates on your weather radio, your fire radio, your media, whatever you're doing. You don't want to be waiting this late. So that's the evacuation plan. And I will tell you that this is like one of the most, I hope this runs. This is one of the most amazing. I always tell people, teach your horses to come. I hope you guys can see this. Can you see it, Wendy?
I think so. Okay.
This lady said come, and her horses are swimming across this flooded area that's also covered with ice. This is like the most awful thing ever. And her horse is like, okay, Mom, here I come.
Wow.
That's the best example of horses. Either that or they're desperate. That or they think you're going to feed them, one or the other.
Yeah.
But the point being that animals should come to you even through hellfire and brimstone. They should come to you. For example, I cannot imagine leading a horse from a boat, because there's a lot of horses, even my horses, that probably would be like, see ya. And then there's other horses that I promise you, they won't go in a trailer normally, and going into a trailer in 3 feet of water would be a bit of a challenge. So that's part of our homework. They should be easy to catch, easy to lead, easy to handle, easy to load by anybody. And so that maybe you're not home. Maybe your next door neighbor has to catch your horses. Maybe you're, on a plane somewhere on vacation and the flood comes. So somebody should be able to handle them. And then the second plan you have to have is a shelter-in-place plan, because you can't get out. So this is a girlfriend of mine down in Florida. I just love this picture. She's like, I'm not going anywhere because you think there's some water on my place. You should see the road down the thing, So she couldn't get out, and she just said, well, we've got a shelter-in-place plan, and the horses are sort of standing out of the rain in her barn, but they had a plan. So whatever our plan would be, the things we have to think about is, I know there's water everywhere, but we also got to think about clean water to drink and those kind of things. Do we have electrical? Do we have a backup? Do we have a generator? Do we have heat sources if it's cold? Because it sometimes does flood when it's cold. Do we have all the things that we need in our homes to be able to survive? Have we moved our equipment? You don't want to leave the tractor down there in the flood zone. All those things. And then of course I would have my truck fueled and hitched in case there really is an emergency. When the water finally goes down, you can get your horse to safe treatment from the veterinarian. So getting the veterinarian to come out to your place in a flood ain't going to happen. So you're going to have to come up with something. And I love this picture. There's a gal that posted this on Facebook, and I just love it because this is over in Australia and there's some significant flooding, but you got to do what you got to do. And that, I think all horse people are going to do that. The thing is your horse ready for that? Has your horse been trained to stand tied? Can you trust him to be standing tied to the chain link fence and not pull the damn thing down? Because I know lots of horses that would. So, do that training for whatever the worst case scenario is, so that your horse knows how to put up with it. Because standing there for 2 hours, no big deal. But standing there for 24 hours, 48 hours, or 72 is going to get a bit more challenging. That's what you have to do. All right. So let's take a look at what just happened this last couple days. This is a picture from NOAA of the estimated flooding, water that rain fell in that area of Tennessee that you guys have been seeing all over the news. And if you've noticed, the really dark reddish purple is right outside of Waverly, McKelvin, and Bold Spring. And that's where they were getting somewhere between 6 and 20 inches of rain, all in just a very short period of time. And that's why this disaster has happened. So this is a picture above where Loretta Lynn's farm is. Notice there's water going over the bridge. So nobody's driving across the bridge. They were basically forced to shelter in place because there's so much water going through there. There's nobody leaving at that point. And this is unfortunately the person who drowned. You can see the picture of him right before he got swept downstream. And I've been watching a lot of things on social media the last 2 days since this happened. And there's a lot of people like, why couldn't you just hold on? I mean, come on, just wait till the water goes down. So I'm going to show you why. Because this is a picture from this particular location of the water that he was trying to hold on in. And you cannot hold on. You are not strong enough. And it is too cold, and you're getting hit by trees and logs and all the other things that are upstream from you. There is no way you can hold on. And
how many foot of water roughly is that at that point?
That water is moving based on, I'm just looking at the video. Me and my husband were trying to estimate that. And we were thinking somewhere around 25 miles an hour.
And it's
that water is hauling 25 miles an hour.
Yeah, but how deep?
And, right there, I'm not sure. It looked like it was about 6 feet deep.
Yeah.
I know it normally is a pretty little waterfall right there, but that's so much water. And I'm going to show you some totals for how much water it really was. So I'm taking you now to Waverly and Hurricane Mills, Tennessee. Waverly is the town that has lost a lot of people. Hurricane Mills is the ranch where Wayne was lost and drowned in that situation I just showed you. And we're going to take a look at some of the ideas that we've already discussed on how we can do these things. So I went to the river gauge for Hurricane Creek and pulled the information. Again, that's freely available. You can find it on the internet anywhere. And what I did was I said, hey, I'm going to take a look at Hurricane Creek and determine how big is their drainage basin and get an idea of how much water was coming through in that video. So if you pull the information, the computer does it magically for you. And it turns out that from McCowan all the way down to Hurricane Mills, the size of the basin is somewhere around 75 square miles. And why is that going to be important? There's the value the computer figured out. That one little creek has 75 square miles of precipitation that it's collecting. And of course, it's literally in the middle of where that 15 inches of rain was coming. So this is where the math comes in, and I won't make you do it. I've actually calculated it for you. If you've got a 75 square mile drainage basin, you get 15 inches of rain, assuming no evaporation or anything else. And you multiply it by the known factor, which is 17 millions of gallons of 1 inch of rain on a square mile times 75 miles and 15 inches of rain. You get 19 billion gallons, Wendy, coming through there. That's 30,000 Olympic swimming pools were coming through that little creek, which is normally, 6 inches deep and cute and all those things. It ain't cute anymore when this happens. And it has literally covered their entire farm. So if we take those ideas and then we take a look at the topographic map, which you guys can get for free, USGS, you guys are going to love the USGS. They're going to get a lot of hits today. So usgs.gov, if you go there, you can get a topographic map of where you live and pull all that information. And all that white stuff behind to the right, that is all floodplain. And where moisture has been pulling sediment down out of the mountains for billions of years. And that right there tells you you don't want to be building your house in a floodplain, period. So that's information. You can go to Google Earth and you can map where you live. That's what I did here. I used Google Earth. I went to Hurricane Mills Road, and that's where the farm is. And then I pulled in their satellite. So now you can see the satellite. If you take a look at the satellite, on the left-hand side of the picture is Loretta Lynn's beautiful home. And then there's a nice big pond, and you notice that there's a lot of dark stuff. That's because that's a swamp out the back of her home, which is part of a pasture. Well, guess what? That's also the floodplain for that little cute creek. So it's going to go across there. And you can see it on the satellite, just clear as day, what actually is going to happen. So now let's go take a look at what FEMA, which has a flood mapping service. Again, they'll do this for free for you. If you go to FEMA's flood map service, you can find your county, you can find your actual location. That's what I did. I found that red dot is a location that I put on the map, and I just pulled it down. It took me 10 minutes to pull this down yesterday. And it shows you all the greenish blue is where they expect the water to go when it floods. So she built her house on the high ground. You can tell somebody knew what they were doing when they built her house on the high ground. And you notice on the other side of the creek, that other structure, they've got some kind of a little museum or something there. Again, it's on the high ground. They knew that was going to be a problem. There's the bridge in the center that covers that goes between the two. So they already knew that was a problem. And if you go to Waverly,
where's the barn on this map, though? Where can you go back?
The barn is actually right there next to her house. There's a barn right where the pond was. That big gray thing, that's the barn.
Okay.
Not the one he was holding on to. He was downstream by that time.
Oh.
Yeah. If you go to Waverly, the same thing. So you've been seeing all these pictures of these houses being pushed downstream and all those things. Well, take a look at this map. There's a lot of houses in the flood zone. And all this is freely available, guys. This is not magic. I didn't have to call anybody. It's all available for free. That's the whole city of Waverly. And it basically has been built in a floodplain. And all those homes are on floodplains. So I wouldn't buy a home there, I can tell you that. But then the worst part of that is, take a look on the upper left. There's two red houses or roofs that you can see.
Can you use your pointer to point it out?
Zone AE right here.
Oh, yeah.
And if you take a look at that, I pulled off that same the red area. I pulled that off. There's those houses. Okay, those red things right here. That's what you saw earlier. And I don't know what's going on with my. Hang on, that's why I didn't want to use my thing. So
okay.
Those red roofs right there. This is across the street, and every bit of this is flooded. Well, guess what? If you look at this, there's the red roofs, and every bit of this is flooded. So it was already predicted. They already knew this is what's going to happen. And I don't know. Some lawyer's probably going to call me. But anyway, The point being, to the point of this, right here, between the railroad track and the river, between the railroad track and the road, take a look back at this. The railroad track and the road, they predicted that was going to be a big pond. Well, guess what? It's the big pond right there.
Oh, wow.
So the point being, these tools that are freely available to you are actually excellent. They actually help, and they are very good at predicting these kind of things. So you guys got to do it on your own to figure out how to keep your horses and your farm safe. So I know some of you are thinking, what does that have to do with my horses and my farm? I just want to know exactly what to do. Well, I'm just going to tell you, it's just like barn fires. There's minimal response time. If you've got a flash flood coming, particularly if you live out west, or if you live in an area that's got a very steep drainage basin, you don't have a lot of time. Flash flooding is instantaneous. You have a few minutes response time. You got to have a preparedness plan ahead of time. And I'll tell you
that Germany, it was so sudden and so fast and so devastating.
I promise you, whoever owned all these beautiful trailers did not want to lose them. So that shows me that he didn't have time to hitch trailers and get them out before the flood came. You know, and this is from the flooding that happened in Nebraska that was the Missouri River. But if you live on the Missouri River and you've got all this stuff, I promise you, he didn't want to lose it. And it must have come up fast if he didn't have time to just even move his trailers. So we see it everywhere. We see it with barns. We see it with trailers. We see it with all kinds of fixed facilities for horse people. Obviously, they didn't have time, or maybe this was their plan. I don't know. Maybe that's the highest ground around. Actually, Wendy, you know what's really funny? When I was over in Australia, they had a place like this, and they had built the round pen up on this big berm, and it was about 12 feet above everything else. And then they put the round pen on it. And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Oh, that's my flood thing." Now I'm looking around and it's flat as heck. And I'm thinking, flooding from what? He said, "I live in the Hunter Valley and it floods here all the time." And sure enough, that's what he did. Was he put his round pen up there. If he had a flood coming, he put his horses up on that berm and let the river go around them. Now, how the heck you get out to your horses to feed them for the next couple of days, I don't know, but at least your horses are alive, theoretically. So I thought that was a pretty good plan. Maybe that's where we need to start getting a little smarter. Anyway.
Well, okay, so maybe you have an answer for this, but say somebody goes to the topographical map and they find out their house or their barn's in a floodplain, which now I can hear them all having a heart attack and sucking air really bad. What can they do?
Okay, the first thing I would do is tell you, move the barn. No, just, it is challenging. If you find you actually have purchased a place and it's already got a fixed facility in a flood zone, that is very challenging. To me, I think you're probably the same way. I hate it to lose the barn and the house and all this stuff. To me, get better insurance, but come up with a plan how you can move the animals. I like the ideas of people who have multiple fencing options so that they have the fence for the part of their pastures that is on high ground, and then they just put their horses on the high ground whenever it looks like it might rain. That comes down to a plan, but really it comes down to good insurance. How you sell in this world of having these many answers that are freely available online, how you sell a place like that, I don't know. But then this is a good example. So this is one of the gals, she came to my class and she's like, "Yeah, I got to get some pictures for you because you won't believe this." Sure enough, that's her farm and that's her area of Corvallis, Oregon. And they apparently get flood through there pretty regularly. And she's like, "Listen, it came up, I didn't even know, I was asleep." And there they are leading their horses out. And then there they are driving out with their horses. Now, I just said, don't do it, right? They did what they did. Whether they should have or not, you see the people that are sort of hanging on the edge of the trailer? Don't do that, people. That's not very smart. But anyway, they got everything out. They got the people out. They got the horses out. They got their horse trailers out. But you're right. It's a beautiful area to live in under normal conditions. And there's so much water that comes through there that almost every single facility is affected. You're right. Our government is having problems with this. When do you say you cannot build anything down there? And it really comes down to, it should be under flood insurance, but you can't get flood insurance if there's really a chance of flooding. So at some point, what we should be doing is saying, hey, we're not going to allow anybody to build that down there. And I know in some communities, they're actually buying back the properties that are in those affected zones, and they're making it zones so you can't build a fixed facility down there. You can have a horse pasture if you want. You can have a rice field, but you can't have, or a cornfield, but you can't have fixed facilities. And you've hit on it. That you're right on it. What do we do? How do you say, no, I know it's beautiful right now, but you can't do it because we know the predicted chance of flooding is very high. I don't know.
Well, and the thing about the storms that we're having lately, like Germany and like Tennessee, they're telling you it's going to rain, but they're not telling you you're going to have 15 inches of rain in what it seems to be happening is we're having much like we had it here. Actually, we got 6 inches of rain a couple of years ago after we'd had a lot of other rain, and it only hit my little town and one little village near me, and it didn't hit the other side of the county. So, when everybody else is like, what are you talking about? We're like 6 inches of rain. They canceled the schools and the buses couldn't, and again, we didn't flood here because we're up high, but the little creek down below, was over the road. So the storms appear to be changing in these intensity of a lot of water coming down fast.
And I'm not an expert hydrologist or anything, but I do know that a lot of things I've read say that, as it gets warmer air can hold more water and then releases that water. So you're right. I grew up in Florida, and it was not unusual to have these torrential downpours every single day. To us, it was like, well, that's just the way it is. Well, now I live in Georgia, and we have them here. And I'm like, and eventually, apparently you're having them there too. So at what point, how much of that is climate change? How much of that is just temperature changes? I don't know, but you're right. And part of it comes down to, don't be a ostrich. Don't stick your head in the ground. Look around, realize that these kinds of things can happen, and you got to come up with a way to try to solve it. And for everything else that there's not, you get insurance, because honestly, that's the only way to really cover yourself.
Yeah.
And good insurance. So now let's talk a little bit about this. We don't recommend anybody doing these kinds of things. These are for some professional rescuers going out to get some horses after most of the water has gone down, but that water is still moving fast enough. I would be very careful about having anybody go in to get my horses under those kind of things. Horses aren't dumb. If they've made it this far, they'll make it a little bit further. They can wait till tomorrow, and we'll go get them tomorrow. They will find the highest ground around if at all possible. Of course, if you look this damn good, Wendy, doing this, then maybe you can go do some swiftwater rescue. Anyway, no, yes, I love this. This is from Houston, and it's so posed. It's awesome. Anyway, this is what a lot of people do, is they try to find a better solution, but there's a lot of horses that you can't do these kind of things with. They would be in the tractor, driving the tractor, doing all this kind of things. It's really dangerous to do. So again, just comes down to having a preparedness plan and getting them out ahead of time, if at all possible. If you do have to respond, I guess this is about all you can do. I certainly don't want you walking through the water. Have you trained your horses to be led by a golf cart and a tractor? That's what it really comes down to. So when I saw these pictures, when this happened a few years ago, I said, well, why didn't they put their horses on the highest ground around? And they said, well, that was the highest ground around. The horses were smart enough to get in the trailer. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool. This is a significant challenge. The rescuers went out to this location for these horses, had a pretty good idea. They said, well, they took a boat and they took a bunch of hay and they just put it in a canoe and let the horses eat out of the canoe. And I guess they were drinking out of the water. They did manage to get them out on the third day, but that's a lot of water to be standing in for 3 days. And those horses obviously ended up at the vet clinic because of it. So there, the water is finally starting to go down in that area. And the thing about this, Wendy, is that becomes when you know there's a problem, she was told there's a problem and she still didn't get her horses out. At what point do we start saying, maybe you need to talk to the nice animal control officer. Maybe you need to get charged for this, because why are those horses being forced to endure something that you already knew was a problem? And I don't know if you've heard about the Cypress Trails out in Houston, Texas or not, but that lady has been hit several times by floods. And same thing as you're talking about. When do you say move the barn? And she's lost, I don't know, 50, 60 horses over the years because of all the floods that have come to her place. But she won't move it. So, and she continues to get animals. At what point do you say, somebody needs to talk to you or make a decision? Now, this one I love, okay? This is some friends of ours in South Carolina, and they have a barge that's available to them, and they taught their horses how to get on the barge so they can move them from island to island. Now, that's pretty extreme preparedness, Wendy. And I don't know about you, but I'm not even sure my horses would stay on the dang barge. I mean, maybe they would, I don't know, but that's a bit of a challenge. So the point of this slide is whatever resources you need, you got to line them up now. You can't be waiting until the last minute. If you're going to use the barge, you better have a contract or whatever, because I promise you somebody else wants to use the barge too. That's just the point of this slide, is think through the process. What do you got to have? And if you do, make sure you've lined up the correct things. I love that picture. Yeah. Anyway, you were talking about Houston, and I got to show you these pictures. So this is where Rebecca gets to be the butthead. So Rebecca always says, get your horses out early. You guys are dumb because you're waiting till the last minute. And why am I always seeing these pictures of people loading horses at the last minute and dragging them out with boats and all these things? And they said, quote, it's historic flooding. I was like, I've been to Houston. That's my picture of what the flood thing underneath the
oh, look at that. How high up does that go?
It goes up to 15 feet. And that's before the flooding. So I took that picture like a year before the flooding. And then they said historic flooding when and I said, it's not historic. Somebody knows that it gets that deep there. So what are you guys thinking? Do you not drive around and look? Sometimes you just got to look around, right? I mean, come on. This is sadly what your horses will be exposed to if you don't think ahead. And that's why I'm showing you these
Oh,
things.
I remember that video up in the upper right. That was.
They get trapped by fences. They get left in places. They're not dumb. They'll find the highest ground around, but your porch might not like having all those horses on the porch. Those kind of things. And it's really a welfare issue for them too, because they don't have anything to eat. They're forced to drink nasty water. They're exposed to the sun. They're exposed to the rain. All the other things that can happen. So that's why it's important for us, as owners, to think ahead. Now, this is the worst case scenario. It gets so deep that they're forced to swim. And I love to swim my horses. It's a lot of fun, but it's also a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort, because the way I always teach my students is I tell them to stand up. Wendy, stand up, okay? And
you see how short I am, see?
Yep, bend over.
Yeah.
And then what I want you to do is turn your head and try to get your head up. Can you feel the muscles on the back of your neck?
Oh, yeah.
Pulling? Yeah, they pull really hard. So a horse not only has to lift his head and neck, he has to tip his nose up while he's swimming, and he's not really made to swim, to try to keep his nostrils above the water. You notice in that picture, the only thing above is the head and the nostrils. So he's fighting the whole time he's swimming to try to keep his head and nostrils above. They don't like their ears wet. No. To keep his nostrils above the water. The thing is, that puts his head down right at the level of the water, which means he can't say, oh, well, there's a fence over there, or that's where I need to go. The bank's over there, or the ocean's that way. The beach is this way. They really can't see if there's any disturbance in the water, which of course in flood water or even ocean water, there's a lot of disturbance. So they're just sort of flying blind or swimming blind, and they can only swim so long because I mean, when I go swimming, I love to swim, but usually I swim for about 10 minutes and then I hang out for a little bit and then go swim for 10 minutes because it's a lot of physical effort. So the point of this is if your horse has to swim more than 10 or 15 minutes, he's probably going to drown. And when they find these horses that have found the quote highest ground around, sometimes they have found a building or a tree branch and they put their chin on it just to keep their poor little nose above the thing, and they're trying to breathe and they're just so exhausted they're letting the rest of their body relax. So let's not get our horses in those kind of situations. This is a good example of that. Happens to be over in Australia. This horse is so exhausted. They found the horse. They're trying to tow it with, they're moving the boat backwards so that the prop won't hurt the horse, but they're holding the horse's head out of the water. And he's so exhausted, he just gave up and he's just floating and just trying to breathe at the same time. And obviously you have to be a really good handler and you have to have really good resources to be able to handle this kind of things. This is another one, just happens to be in Loudoun County, Virginia. Horses that were in barns and they were trying to get those horses out and leading them with boats.
When was this?
Extremely challenging. Huh?
When was this picture?
This was 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago now. And sadly, one of the horses drowned. They were trying to make the effort and the horse just panicked and that's the problem. You know, if they panic or they get up underneath the boat, things go wrong.
Well, and this is either late fall or early spring. There's no leaves on the trees. I'm trying to remember because I live not far from Loudoun County.
Yeah.
Wow.
So very distressing and it's very difficult. And obviously the biggest thing is, even if you have boats and people and PPE and all the things that fire rescue has, you can only get one at a time. So if you got 20, that's 20 trips. And you're putting people in challenging places and you're obviously taking a risk on your animals. So got to think ahead.
I mean, you got to look at this picture and realize there is a man in the water and God knows what temperature the water is, given there's no leaves on the trees and how the others are dressed and, you know, trying to do a rescue. It's
just awful. You know, this is the other way you can do it. Just put them in the boat. No, obviously this baby is exhausted. You got to think about, she's been out there this after Hurricane Harvey. Babies like to lay down, 16 hours a day or something? He hasn't been able to lay down because if he laid down, he'd be in the water. So he's so exhausted. They put him in the boat and he laid there, which means he's really not doing well. But it's a great picture. And the point of that is, you know, just don't leave them in those kinds of places where we don't have a plan. Comes back to the old thing we always talk about. Do your homework. Find those maps, those kind of things. And what I'll do, Wendy, is I'll send you the links so that you can put them up on the site and people can just click on those links and go to them. For some of the state-specific things, you'll have to find it for your state. But if you keep looking around, you'll find it. And update your insurance. Lastly, if you need information, that's the information on the book. And if you need to get a hold of me, that's my cell phone number, that's my email. And Wendy, I really appreciate you having me.
Well, and you're so generous to just put up your cell phone number and let people call you. You know, it's
and they do. It's great.
Yeah.
And sometimes like Kimberly, she called me and said, "Hey, do you horseback ride too?" I was like, "Yeah, we've been going horseback riding." Wendy, I'm going to be up in Loudoun County next weekend. So.
Oh, rats! I'm supposed to be in Connecticut next weekend.
I know.
Text me anyway. Let me know where you are.
I will.
So does anybody have any questions? Like you've been a really silent audience. Either you're stunned or you're shocked, or Rebecca's done such a good job that nobody has any questions because it's been really quiet out there. Just let us know.
Ellen's right. It looks like a chemical burn. She's talking about the flooding on the skin, and she's exactly right. That's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Stunned. I mean, and the bottom line is, you know, do your homework. And
do your homework.
Never hurts to do your homework and not need the homework that you've done, right? That's the whole idea, is to not need it in the end.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. So people are going to.
We'll come up with a list of all those websites too, guys, so that Wendy can
Rebecca,
put them out.
if you could actually make me a PDF with all those links, then what I can do is put it up for the free downloads on the website. Because if I put it over on the YouTube, it gets messy over there.
Gets lost. Okay.
Yeah, we could just have a flood sheet and I'll stick it up.
Perfect. I will go do that right now.
Great. All right. Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. And Rebecca, once again, thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and information. And I have no idea what we're going to talk about next, but I'm sure you'll be back.
I'll come up with something. Great. Thank
Maybe
you, sweetie.
fun
Bye.
sometime, right?
I know. I saw it. And honestly, I learned a lot too, because some of these sites I had only been cursorily touching, and I got really serious about it. And wow, I mean, it was an eye opener.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. And again, thank you, Rebecca, for presenting another wonderful webinar. And we'll be back on Thursday with Melissa Deal talking about positive reinforcement. So I'll see you there. And thanks everybody. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.